This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with author, speaker, and creativity workshop facilitator Patti Clarke. We talk about creativity workshops for women, empty nest syndrome, and neuroplasticity. Enjoy this episode. Hey, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to have Patti Clarke on the show. Patti is an accomplished speaker and workshop leader dedicated to helping people through various life transitions on their journey to an extraordinary life. For more than 30 years and over several continents, Patti has been sharing her knowledge and wisdom with others. A native of the San Francisco Bay Area, she has taught English at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and at Oregon State University. Patti's work has been included in several publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, and the Mindful Word. Today, she spends part of her time in the United States and part of her time in New Zealand. And this is her first book, This Way Up, has just been released, and it's a total page turner. I'm really excited today to talk to her about this new book. Patti, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, James. I am so happy to be here.
So share with our listeners what's going on in your world, first of all.
Well, what's going on right now is I'm on a book tour, and it's so much fun, and it's so exciting, and I'm having a blast. And to be honest, it is a dream come true. This is something I have visualized for, most of my adult life, and suddenly now I have this book published, and I'm on a book tour. I was at Barnes & Noble yesterday, and I'm at Books Inc. in the heart of the city in Opera Plaza in San Francisco on Thursday, and I'm having so much fun. It's just a dream come true.
And so I mentioned, at the top of the show there that you have taught English at university, but this is your first book.
Yes.
So this was surprising. When the book came through and I started reading, I thought this is a great, that first chapter is like, okay, I need to read on. It's a well written book as well. So this is, I tell straight away, you obviously, you've done a lot of writing, but I was surprised that this was your first book. So why has it taken you to this point in your life to kind of get that first book out?
First of all, thank you so much. You gave me chills. So saying that and using those words, a page turner, and that it got you involved, that just makes my heart sing. So first of all, thank you for that. Well, it's my first book because this book took 10 years to write. And I've been a journaler all of my adult life. I started journaling quite avidly when I was a teenager because of a lot of angst, teenage angst, and the way that I got through a lot of that was by writing. So words have always been my friend, and so I've journaled forever. And I tell people that I work with that journaling is a great way to externalize the internal angst. And women I work with, I've been running workshops for about 20 years with women in New Zealand, and a lot of the women that I work with have asked for the information that I talk about in my workshops, and so that's one of the reasons I started the book. There's a few, but yeah, that's one of the reasons. And then, as I say, it took 10 years to get here. And
obviously, I'm not going to spoil the book itself because I want everyone to go out and buy it. But there's definitely a feeling, just to give people a sense of the book. It opens up, and it's a woman who is an important point in her life. She would, I suppose, what we call a new empty nester. Her children have just left home for college. And she's thinking about, what is the purpose of her life? And exactly. I think that, I speak to, a lot of men and women who are in that same situation where they're finally, for the first time, they actually have the home to themselves, and they're having to reassess what the purpose of their life is, because they've spent all these years bringing up their children, getting them off to school, looking after them, taking them to sports practice, all that stuff, and then now they have this gaping void of time, and some of the men I know, they kind of have a little bit of a midlife crisis, but often a lot of the women, interestingly, start to to re-find something creative within inside of them.
Yes.
I mean, you're working with women in workshops all the time. What are you finding is happening at that point in their lives?
Absolutely. It's so interesting. And it certainly happens for men. I totally agree with you. But for women, what I'm finding in particular is that women, especially women who have dedicated to themselves to raising children, although other women have been impacted as well, with this empty nest, they've spent so much time nurturing and giving of self that when suddenly that is no longer in their lives, there's a feeling of directionlessness, of purposelessness, and of having to redefine self. And that is, it's a hard place to be in. It's terrifying. And women suddenly are feeling like, I'm no longer needed. I'm not nurturing. I'm not doing that which I feel is so important. And I've spent so much time doing it. Who am I now? Who am I as a woman, as a person? And so there's a real sense of I need to figure this out again. I need to redefine myself and find myself again. And that whole feeling of empty nest is very real. I mean, first of all, it's a real thing. It's been defined and put in mental health books, etc. But also another piece that's so interesting that I'm finding, James, with women I'm working with is that women of my age, I'm in my 50s, we were baby boomers and we started raising our kids, and as they got older, we started taking care of our parents. We were this sandwich generation. And then the kids grew up and left home. Parents started dying. And then there was that sense of, oh my gosh, now what? And also this huge thing is happening too called the gray divorce revolution. And we're living longer. We've got more money oftentimes. And so suddenly women, I'm speaking specifically for women now because I work more with women are finding that they're getting divorced now, and now suddenly no kids, no husband, and no parents to watch. And there is this sense of bereavement, bereft, anxiety, like, oh my God, who am I? What do I do? And at that point, there is this need to redefine and find self. And I am finding that I'm totally recommending for women the best way to get back in touch is through creativity.
And it's interesting because the character in the book, at first, she makes a bit of a stumble. She has that void, and she does something which is not particularly positive. Let's put it that way. And then something that, as a result, something positive, very, very positive, kind of comes out of that as well. And you start to see this flourishing of this creative person again that was maybe locked down for many, many years. Yes, absolutely. And I love the fact that you use flourishing, because a big piece of the way that the protagonist, Kat, emerges is through a sense of flow, as Csikszentmihalyi explains it in positive psychology. And that's what I love it when I see, well, first of all, I love it when it happens for me, that sense of flow in the creative process. And I love it when I see women I'm working with find themselves through that. But yeah, and just, not giving away too much, but one of the things that happens with the protagonist is she drinks too much and she gets in a car accident. And what I find a lot, James, and I don't know if you do too, but a lot of creative people feel this sort of sense of I don't know, maybe they feel things more than others, I'm not sure. And addiction is huge. Yeah. And with addiction is sort of that sense of either numbing out because we're feeling things so deeply. And when any of us feel deeply, there is often a sense of wanting to numb that. And I certainly see that a lot with the women I work with. And it's that's one of the reasons that I chose Kat to have that huge explosive moment through addiction, because I think a lot of women can relate to just having one too many glasses of wine. Yeah, and it's interesting as well. You were talking about the baby boomers, and then also probably the Gen X, and this is a big difference I would say with the millennials. All the studies are showing they're actually drinking much less than previous generations because, and especially certainly here in Europe as well, middle class women aged between 30 to 55 are actually pretty heavy pretty big drinkers.
Yes.
So for them it's become it's a cultural thing partly, and it's just a way to to relax and everything. But there's that fine line, and as you mentioned, a lot of creative people use it as a little bit of a crutch, because part of the reason that when they do creative work, as as a writer, you kind of have to lose yourself into the project as part of doing that kind of creative work. You kind of get so immersed in the thing that you basically almost give all to it, and so your emotions are pretty, they're pretty raw because that's what you're having to do in order to dig deep for what you're trying to write.
Absolutely. And it's almost like, again, going back to that idea of flow. When we can be in that space of flow, that is in my opinion, that is our truest connection to self and that deepest sense of self. And it's like a high, but it's an authentic high, and it's wonderful. And a lot of us are searching for that, but we look for it in the wrong places. I love the fact that you brought up that idea of the women and alcohol, and there's been so much written about it lately. And the whole thing of women and wine, and it's been glamorized. You look at Facebook groups, and there's mommies that love their wine, and women in wine, and all of these things. And it's with that glamorization again. There's that sort of disconnect with self. It's hard. It's a real double-edged sword. Sort of like, oh, this is so cool, and oh, why are we really numbing out? I don't know. It's a hard one.
And the character in the book, she uses a very simple it sounds like a very simple tool for creativity and exploring your creativity in journaling that you were just talking about earlier. And then obviously the second part in the book is you give lots of some a very systematic way, essentially a 12-week course on someone to discover their own creativity. But I sense at the start of that is really just this process of journaling. So can you talk about from you personally as a writer, what journaling as a process has done for you, and then when you work with groups, what are some of the things that you find when you first start describing journaling and kind of first start getting that feedback from those students?
Yeah, absolutely. Journaling for me, as I said earlier, has always been a way out for me. It's a way for me to sort of externalize that angst. And I'm a lover of words, so I love playing with it. But I also recommend that journalers not have lines, because I don't like being stuck in the lines. Sometimes I need to write really big, or sometimes I just need to scratch on paper because it's not about words. It's sort of about that visceral release. And also, very importantly, is that creativity doesn't have to be with words. I like using my hands to connect with that, as I said, very viscerally. But I suggest that anyone connect with it any way they can. It may be with symbols, with color, with smudging. It's just about getting that sort of flow feel, that visceral feel. At the beginning of my workshops, every single participant gets a journal, and I say just play with it. Play with either words, color, whatever, because what I find is that we get stuck in this sort of spiral in our heads, and it will go around and around and around. And part of the process that I describe in my book, that I've named it Creative Positive Reframing, CPR. Creative Positive Reframing is sort of what I've called the process, because when we get stuck in that negative loop, it's sort of embedded in our head. And I find that one of the best ways to sort of let it out is quite physically, viscerally, with words, with pictures, with color. Take that out and then sort of reframe wherever we're stuck. And this is sort of the beginning of neuroplasticity, a beginning of reframing and redoing things in our brains, so that we don't get stuck in those negative patterns that many of us, when we're stuck in, try to numb out and going back to that, any way to not be present. So what happens with a lot, going back to your question, with a lot of women in the workshops, at first when I talk about creativity on any form, the participants are frightened. They react. They push against it because they think of creativity as a blank canvas and it's scary. Whereas if I talk about creativity as just put whatever's inside out, try and get lost in that flow. And if words don't work for you, okay, how about color? Color's not working? Okay, how about moving with music? It's sort of like finding that space where you can lose yourself to find yourself. It feels like the ultimate irony, you know.
But I think that's what you're kind of alluding to there as well. Is an interesting thing that has changed over the actually centuries. Where now often ego is thought is spoken of in quite very much about the ego. It's about the creative, the lone creative genius. It's the I. It's very much an I type of thing, and the media love to put forward this idea of this single creative genius, the individual. But that's actually obviously not always the way it was. So way back in the Roman and ancient Greek times, when people talked about there being a difference between genius, between someone being a creative genius and having creative genius. So they thought more that we were vessels for creative genius, and the creative genius might come from the muses, or might come from energy, or might come from your people around you, the community in which you were in. But we couldn't take all the credit, but also we couldn't take all the blame. If something didn't work out, then I'll move on to the next thing. If it did work out, you couldn't be this egocentric person. But people like Giorgio Vasari at with the Lives of the Artists, and Michelangelo writing the books about the artists in the Renaissance, changed it. So suddenly it became about the I, and it suddenly wiped out all these people that were helping, all the people, the helpers, the supporters, the apprentices, the people that worked in the studios. And so it seemed that this idea of creativity turned into maybe more of a macho thing, and it's definitely had a distinction from where the East went with creativity, where the East look at creativity much more about combining ideas rather than using the blank page, creating something from new, which is the way that most people talk about creative. So I would think that must be quite intimidating if the women you're working with are coming to this idea of creativity with it all has to be, me, myself, and I, ego. It has to be driven in that way. Yes.
Oh my God. Yes. The way you described it is perfect. And I love a lot. There have been several TED Talks, and I've seen some stuff on your website as well. And very much, I love the old version of the creative as more of a unity, we're connecting to source, and there's all kinds of pieces to it. I see it as more fluid and not just that rigid I. And I agree with you when we get stuck in that I am creative rather than there is this creativity that we can all access. It does become more scary, and it does lose such an important essence. I just so agree. And so when I talk about creativity with people, I talk about hooking into creativity almost as the soup, going back to the sort of Jungian idea that where we can hook into this energy that we all have access to. What we have to find is almost the venue that works for us, whatever it is, whether it's being outside in the garden, through music, through color, through words, because then we all connect into the creativity that we all have access to. And that genius is what I think of as energy, and that people are talking more and more about now, that it's that it's available to all of us, and that old, almost mythological sense. And I love that because that's what I'm trying to communicate. It's in all of us. All of us can connect with it. And that's when, in my opinion, we find our truest sense of self, when we can actually feel like, oh, yes. And when we connect to that, that's where we find our inspiration. That's where we find a way toward inspired action. And all of us have it, and I think we've been taught out of it, and we need to relearn it.
So you mentioned self, I'm interested to know, when you work with those in those workshops. I've spoken at a couple of different events, and I remember one, just reminding as you're speaking just now, where a woman came up to me at the end and she said, all this thing about creativity, it said, it feels a bit selfish. And she was talking, and she was one of these empty nesters. She'd brought up a family of boys in her case, and they'd left, and she would always been giving herself to others for the service of others, and then suddenly doing this thing where she was going to be sitting down and, in her case, doing stuff with pottery and different things. She said it feels a little bit selfish. And she was having to kind of figure that out in her head. I mean, do you ever find out with your groups you're speaking to, making that switch from where they've primarily been focused on serving others and helping others with young families and things, to it being them about trying to rediscover that creative self? Are the tensions there?
Yes. Absolutely. It's sort of learning to value that self with the capital S, being that highest self or that deepest self, whichever one works for you, and learning to love yourself first in order to have the full cup that then you can give from. But we've been trained that selfish is bad, and instead of to thine own self be true, in that largest sense of loving oneself and then being able to be a full cup and give from there, we have been taught, especially as women, that that's not okay, and that you put others before you always, and that selfishness is negative. And so it's sort of that difference between the connotation and the denotation, that we have to value self as that largest self, that then from that place, then we can be of service, because we can't be of service when we're empty, is my experience. But it's a hard one to learn. It's about deconstructing to reconstruct that piece.
And that, where you are now with your life, I mean, what was holding you back then from making that jump? You said this book was a 10-year process to write this book as well. But what was holding you? Was it just simply that the time it took to kind of get these ideas out onto the page and get things edited? Or were there other things that were kind of going on that kind of maybe held you back, either psychologically or just, creatively or professionally, that meant you couldn't get this book out until this point?
Well, it's a little bit of a convoluted story. I'll try and be quick. I started writing the book when my son was 12, and that was 10 years ago. I had been talking a lot about the ideas in my book to my kids since they were young. It's a belief system that I hold dear, and I was facilitating workshops with teenagers and with women, and I had been talking about these things. And one day I was at a bookstore with my son. I was talking about some things that I had just seen in a book, and at 12 years old, he put his hand on the latest book I was looking at, that I was taking notes in my journal, and he said, "Mom, when are you going to stop taking these notes from other people's work? When are you going to write your own book? You have been telling me this stuff for years." And so at 12 years old, I felt like, oh my God. And I felt like I would be a fraud if I didn't put my money where my mouth was and absolutely say, yeah, you're right. So I started writing the book then. And the way that my process was, I gathered a lot of information. I was trained when I went to University of California at Berkeley, I was trained to do a lot of research. So I had all my little index cards and I was collecting information. And that process took a while. And then I finally sort of had all the information, James, but I didn't know how to frame it. I didn't want my book to be a self-help book where I'm telling anybody what to do, because I don't have the answers for you. I know some tools that have worked for me, but it's very much a process of self-exploration. So I needed to frame it in a way that felt authentic to me and that I felt like would inspire women especially to do their own work and not to say, give me an answer, because I don't have an answer. And so I sort of got the framework together, and that came together. And then after all this, I finally found an agent And I got so excited because I had this agent that I found in London, and he was wonderful. And this was about 5 years into the process. He got me a publishing contract. I felt like, yes, my life is unfolding perfectly, and I felt so great. And the landscape of the publishing industry changed dramatically. And my agent ended up saying he didn't want to be an agent anymore. It wasn't working for him. The publishing industry was changing too much. He closed up shop. He pulled away, and with him went my contract. And at about whatever that was, 6 years into the process, I just felt like, okay, I gave it my best shot. I wanted to crawl in a hole and stop and cry and give up. And actually what happened is very soon after that, I wrote a letter to Richard Bach, who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and he wrote me back this beautiful, lovely letter. He was a real inspiration to me, and he wrote me back a personal letter, and it was beautiful. And also I was doing a lot of meditating, and even though I wanted to throw away my whole manuscript, and at one point I actually did put it in the trash on my computer. I pulled it out, and I kept going. But I did. It was like I was being, petulant. I wanted to crawl in a corner and kick and scream and cry. And then I moved on, and I, sort of reconfigured and reworked it and edited it again. And then I found my publishing house, She Writes Press, which is a perfect fit for me. So in retrospect, James, it was all perfect.
Yeah.
At the time, I wanted to say.
And it's interesting. The format of the book is interesting because you must have been extremely aware, writing about the subjects you're writing, that the legacy of Julia Cameron looms large, because we've all, anyone that's doing any creativity work, I speak to, the two names that come up time and time again is Julia Cameron and Edward de Bono, in different reasons, different places. So she wrote such an amazing book on that, and then it seemed to be no one really wrote about the way in the kind of way that she wrote it, or kind of covering it in that kind of way at all for years and years. But the format that you've taken, while the kind of writing style and the writing is different, but the thing that kind of spoke to me was how you combined essentially a novel. So you took the narrative form, but then you cleverly, I think, put on this part 2 of the book, which is the how-to bit. So it was like a novel stroke manifesto with the actual how. Okay, this is what you need to do next. And a lot of books will do one part or they'll do the other, but very few. I mean, Julia Cameron's one of the few that actually was able to do that. And I still think today, with online courses and stuff, I actually still think that as a format is still a winning format. I think it's a great way of teaching and using a book for what it can be used for.
Thank you so much. You just used my name in the same sentence with Julia Cameron, and for that, I will forever love you, James. She absolutely influenced me. I read her book in I don't remember if it was late 80s, early 90s, somewhere around 89, 90, 91, somewhere in there. And it was transformational. And so absolutely she influenced me, and I did her whole Artist's Way, and I just felt like a new self emerged. And I was at the opposite end then. That was, it was right as I was planning my new family, and then I had my kids, and I was still focusing on the journaling that I'd learned with Artist's Way. So when I started writing my book, absolutely Julia Cameron was part of it, and she's many of her quotes are in my book. I quote her often. She's a huge mentor to me. But what I did when I was doing my research that I was talking about earlier is what I found out is that 12 weeks shifts from, something you're trying to do into habitual. And so that's what I was trying to get to, was day by day journaling for 12 weeks then becomes habit. And that idea of, okay, now I want to use this at the beginning of my day, at the end of the day, or when something in the middle of the day happens and I want to externalize it. I wanted it to become, that's the first point of call, so that I don't get stuck in that mind minutia stuckness. And so she absolutely influenced me, and I found out that there was a method to her madness, that the 12 weeks was very was very focused, and that it was, conscious, and mine too. The 12 weeks was a very conscious decision on my part, because of that, getting a person into the habit of doing it. But yes, absolutely, it was instrumental in my direction for writing and composing the book.
And can you talk, in this creative journey that you've gone through as well, maybe about an insight or a light bulb moment in your life where you went, okay, maybe this is the direction I need to be going with my writing and my work, or a new distinction that kind of came to you, okay, this is something I need to make a change in? Yeah.
My aha moments, I've had so many, and I'm always so grateful when they happen. I guess with the book, the real aha moment came when my son said that. Of course, that was the sort of, whoa, deer in the headlights. But I started getting I got a real hit of needing to write and making writing a path when I was at a meditation course in India in the year 2000. And it was, I was sitting with Sai Baba in an ashram there, having a silent retreat, and I had been in this silent retreat for a while, and I got this, just almost like someone threw a bucket of water on me, like, you need to be writing. You need to take this writing, and you need to move forward with it. So even though I had been a writer all my life in terms of journaling, it was when I had finally been quiet enough and stripped off enough space that aha moment, that literally, I mean it felt like someone splashed water on my face, and it was like, move forward with this. Get out of your way and do this.
So when I speak to a lot of creatives, and I speak to them about meditation, I know you're talking about you going on a meditation retreat, a silent retreat there, a lot of them are worried about going on one. For the simple reason is that that monkey mind, the mind that's jumping from one thing to another, is something that they actually quite enjoy, and they feel it's part of their kind of creativity, and they worry, oh, I'm going to go on this meditation retreat and my mind is going to be silent and quiet and calm like a lake, but then all the ideas are going to be gone. So you're someone that does creative work as a writer, and you also do meditation as well. Has it changed the nature of your creative work doing meditation?
Has it changed the nature? Yes and no. I mean, if you talk to anyone who knows me, they would say that I am like, people have often called me, the little ever-ready bunny or whatever it's called, where I'm plugged in and I just hop around. I mean, I've got lots and lots of energy and I run around, and my mind can be my worst nightmare. So I know about the monkey mind in terms of sometimes it's kind of fun and exciting, but generally speaking, especially now that I don't drink at all anymore and I don't, it's like I don't go into medicating self. I need to get quiet or I make myself nuts. But I do understand that, oh my God, I don't want to lose this creative juice. I don't want to lose it. But to me, when I get quiet enough and I can be silent, then I get the direction. It's almost like taking all of these scattered molecules that are just going all over the place and then honing them in. I didn't lose any of them. I'm just putting them more into a laser focus. And that works really well for me. The energy, the molecules, they're still there. They're still bouncing around, but I can contain them so that I feel more directed. I definitely feel like if I don't get quiet time and journal to get some of this chaos out of my head and get quiet, that I'll just bounce off the walls way too much, and I won't be able to focus because there's too much racket going on in my head. So I have found that it's been a gift beyond measure to learn how to be quiet and do some mindfulness.
And what other advice have you received about living a creative life, living a happy life?
In terms of the happy life, and I talk about this a lot in my book, I'm very heavily influenced by positive psychology. I love the field of positive psychology. It's the work of Martin Seligman, the work of Csikszentmihalyi, the work of there's Barbara Fredrickson. There's so many. Richie Davidson, they've heavily influenced me, and because I'm kind of this interesting amalgamation of the fascination with the science of the brain and neuroscience, and also to this sort of scattered creative, and the combination of the two sometimes feels like they're bouncing off each other, like they can't possibly connect. And I find that positive psychology for me is a way to take both of those and work together. To me, it's what I liked and what worked for me is that so much of life and attitude is choice, and that if it's choice, that's like such a relief for me, because I came from such a dysfunctional family, and there was so much chaos, and I had a lot of chaos in my life. And so to be told and to read and to see the science that indeed we can make these choices and change our life, to me, that was probably the most influential piece. And then a lot of pieces that I've learned in dealing with addiction, with my own addiction and other people's, that the things that I've learned, the spiritual foundation that I've accessed through that have also been life-altering.
And one of the things that this character in the book says is she takes on this kind of mantra of be happy now. And so thinking about happiness as a choice, at first I was thinking about that. I thought, okay, you can, because we often feel that our externalities, our environment, the things around us are the things that make us happy. But then what she was saying in this, and what she was discovering in this, that actually, be happy now, be happy is a choice as well. Yeah. It's a way of looking at the world and interpreting the things that are going on around. And I thought that was actually a very nice little big kind of powerful thing within the book as well.
Yeah. I think so too. And it's hard to say that. I'm working with a lot of women that have had some horrific things happen in their lives. So to actually say, there's this. I love the sort of ping pong bounce between the protagonist Kat and her dear friend Jess, because Jess is the skeptic. Jess is the one that calls her and says, no, it's not that simple, and so keeps that dialogue alive, because it's not that simple. You can't just say be happy now. That's if anybody said that to me, I'd react. No, it's not that simple. However, it is choice. So there are ways to get to that point of finding that peace to make that choice. And yes, as I say in the book too, it might require going through therapy first. If you have had horrific things happen, we can't just put a Band-Aid on a festering wound and say, be happy now. It's not that simple. However, it can be that simple. And that in conjunction with other things, with working on healing past wounds and working with finding that deepest sense of self, that we can make the choice every day to be operating from that place of, I will choose to be happy and to send out love in front of me. Go ahead. And
your character goes through, obviously, a number of things that happened before she gets to that point. The empty chair therapy, I thought was interesting, having not been through any kind of therapy myself, and kind of getting a bit of an insight into that type of therapy and that kind of world. I actually thought that was really fascinating. As a tool that therapists obviously use. It sounds like this is a real world thing that is used by therapists, and you can absolutely see how it was useful for this character to start in that process, that flourishing that we were talking about earlier, that allows her to kind of get to that point. And without those things and going through those different stages and going through some of those pain points, but also those quite cathartic moments, she wouldn't have been able to get to that place.
Yes, absolutely. And I recommend this in my book, and I recommend it in workshops. I myself am not a therapist. I would never claim to be a therapist, and I wouldn't try. But I often say, if you're feeling stuck, if it's starting to dredge up trauma, don't try and do it alone. I have lots of links to therapists in New Zealand and in the U.S., depending on where I'm running my workshops. Don't try and do it alone, because sometimes the trauma is too much. Do some work with a therapist where you're feeling safe and where you're feeling nurtured, and then move forward. And with that said, even in conjunction while doing that, you can still make the choice to be happy today and do what's in front of you with a positive mindset. One is not exclusive to the other, but it does take focused thought. Right now I'm reading Marianne Williamson's latest book, From Tears to Triumph, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful book, and she talks about, sometimes the darkness is very heavy, and there's some heavy stuff that goes on in individual lives as well as in the world. But, each day we have to make the choice on how we're going to deal with it ourselves. So I'm certainly not being flippant and saying, just be happy now, you'll be fine, because that's not accurate.
So, and you mentioned some resources there. Do you have any online resources, or maybe you have tools or mobile apps like Evernote or things that you use that you find really valuable?
Absolutely. First of all, what I'm going to be doing, because what I found is I reach some people in the U.S., I reach some people in New Zealand, and when I'm in Australia, some people in Australia, but I've had a lot of women say, but I want to do a workshop based on your book. So I have actually started running online workshops, and the information about my online workshops is available on my website, which is thiswayupbook.com. So that's one thing that I'm offering. One of the tools that I love. Well, I use all the tech tools that I can. I do use Evernote. I do use Google Docs. I use Siri all the time now. Constantly, whenever something pops into my mind, I'll just grab my phone and say, Siri, remind me of this, if I'm driving and I don't have a way to write stuff down. And I love Siri. She reminds me. She doesn't forget like I do.
Do you have Australian Siri, or do you have American Siri? Because funny, one of my previous guests is someone who's very good friends with the woman who is the voice of Australian Siri. And he said it's quite strange, but it's quite strange when you actually call her and you get that voice.
What's funny is I have both. It depends on which country I'm in. I change her voice depending on which country I'm in, because mostly because of directions and pronunciation, it works better, But that's funny. Yes, I do.
And if you could only recommend one book to our listeners, and also one record, one piece of music to our listeners, what would they be?
Book, absolutely, The Artist's Way. It's transformational, and I think it is ageless. So I would recommend that book for sure. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. The Artist's Way, available everywhere, in bookstores, online. Record, that's a hard one. Probably Joni Mitchell, Blue, because that's that she's who I turn to when I'm needing either inspiration or when I'm needing consolation. I listen to Blue, and I feel like I'm in a warm blanket.
Wonderful. I'm going to be putting all these links, as well as the online course that you mentioned, here on the show notes. People go to jamestaylor.me and just type in Patti Clarke, and you'll get all the links for this as well. So, final question here for you, Patti. Let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So all you have are the tools of your trade, as a writer, as a speaker, as a workshop facilitator, and the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, but you have no contacts, no one knows who you are. How would you restart?
By journaling, of course. I would start by writing again, and I would just start researching, pulling things, and reminding myself that it's a path, and here we go again. And I almost did, it's like when I threw it away, I almost did have to start again. And with my editor, there was a lot of restart, but I would just start with me again, journaling and believing that, okay, well, let's get going again. There's a reason that this is on restart, and here we go.
Fantastic. And finally, what is the best place that people can connect with you and learn more about the courses, the book, and any workshops that you're doing?
All right, thanks. thiswayupbook.com has links to my to where to buy my book and about the online workshops, etc. You can also find my blog posts on patticlark.org. I've been doing blog posting for about 5 years now. And in terms of the UK, what I found is that I am on amazon.co.uk, but you do have to type in This Way Up 7 tools for unleashing your creative self and transforming your life, because This Way Up has been used a lot. So okay. The entire title of the book, This Way Up, 7 tools for unleashing your creative self and transforming your life.
And we'll put all the show notes here. Just type in, go to jamestaylor.me, type in Patti Clarke, and you're going to get links to all of these that we've been discussing today. Well, Patti, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been fascinating. I'd recommend people to go and buy the book. It's a really great read, and also the second part of the book, which kind of takes you through that 12-week course, is awesome as well. So thank you so much. I wish you all the best with the launch of this book, Patti.
Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate it, and it's been just wonderful being on the show.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.